July 2nd, 1943. In the skies above Sicily, a squadron of black pilots, later known as the Tuskegee Red Tails, turned the Luftwaffe's mockery into shock. P-40 Warhawks dove, guns blazing, downing 100 German fighters with unmatched skill. For the first time, prejudice faced a reckoning mid-air, as Red Tails racked up kills that would etch their names in history. The roar of engines, the flash of gunfire, the courage of men long underestimated. This was the day the impossible became reality. But how did they reach this moment? Earlier that year, 1943, the world was engulfed in a war of unprecedented scale. Across Europe and North Africa, the Axis and Allied powers clashed in battles that would shape the course of history. The Allies were pushing to reclaim territories occupied by Axis forces, and control of the skies had become as vital as control of land and sea. Air superiority was no longer just a strategic advantage, it was a necessity for survival. Yet, even as the US mobilized its vast resources, one glaring contradiction remained. The armed forces were segregated. African American men, eager to serve their country, faced skepticism, discrimination, and systemic barriers that questioned their ability to fight. Many high-ranking officials doubted their competence, relegating black pilots to menial roles or ground duties. Some newspapers and military correspondences openly mocked the idea of African American combat aviators. Flying a plane? That's above their station, one report sneered. Despite the prejudice, a determined cadre of men trained at the Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama. Here, amid the red clay and endless skies of the South, they learned not just how to fly, but how to fight against both an enemy abroad and bias at home. Rigorous physical training, relentless drills, and tactical instruction pushed each pilot to the limits. They mastered takeoffs, dogfighting maneuvers, bombing runs, and formation flying. Every exercise, every test, every flight was a statement. We belong in the sky. The Tuskegee program was more than training. It was a movement. Its graduates carried not only the weight of the war effort, but the hopes of an entire community, demanding respect and recognition. Letters from home reminded them of this dual mission: to fight the Axis abroad and the prejudice at home. Families, friends, and even local newspapers in African American communities celebrated each milestone, marking every flight as both personal triumph and collective defiance. By mid-1943, the first group of Tuskegee-trained pilots was ready for deployment. Assigned to the 99th Fighter Squadron, they were sent overseas to join the fight in the Mediterranean theater. Their initial mission: provide bomber escort, suppress enemy fighters, and protect ground operations during the Allied advance in Sicily. Yet even as they prepared for combat, they faced scrutiny from their own allies. White American units, skeptical of their abilities, often watched with doubt as the Red Tails took off. And across the sky, German pilots had already heard of these colored pilots and planned to test their mettle. The stage was set for a historic confrontation. The Mediterranean skies, previously dominated by seasoned Luftwaffe pilots, were about to witness the arrival of a squadron whose courage and skill would defy expectations. Each mission was a proving ground. Every engagement tested their training, instincts, and resolve. And while history would later celebrate their victories, at the time, each sortie carried the weight of proving themselves capable not just as soldiers, but as human beings fighting against entrenched prejudice. Among the countless soldiers and pilots in the Mediterranean, one squadron began to stand apart. Their reputation for precision, discipline, and daring maneuvers grew with each encounter. Enemy aircraft were shot down. Allied bombers returned safely from missions that had once seemed perilous. And for every successful sortie, the Red Tails carved a place in military history that had been denied to them for too long. But behind the formation, flying, and strategic victories were individual stories, men with families, dreams and fears, each carrying the hope of proving that skill. Courage and loyalty were not bound by skin color. Among them, one pilot's journey would emerge as emblematic of the Tuskegee Airmen's impact, bridging personal courage with historical change. Among the countless soldiers, one name would soon echo through history. Among the Tuskegee Airmen, one man stood out, not for bravado, but for precision, determination, and an unwavering sense of duty. First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall, a young African-American pilot from Cleveland, Ohio, carried with him the weight of history and the quiet resolve of a man who refused to be underestimated. Charles had always been fascinated by flight. As a boy, he would watch planes soar overhead, imagining himself navigating the skies with skill and grace. But dreams alone could not shield him from the barriers he would face. The moment he enlisted, he encountered skepticism and outright hostility. Superiors questioned whether he and his fellow black pilots could endure the rigorous training and intense combat of World War II. Yet, Charles's response was simple. He would let his actions speak. At Tuskegee, Charles excelled. His instructors noted his composure under pressure, his ability to anticipate enemy movements, and his calm decisiveness in the cockpit. He was meticulous in his pre-flight checks, disciplined in formation flying, and daring when strategy demanded it. But beyond his technical skill, it was his character that set him apart, a blend of quiet confidence, loyalty to his squadron, and an almost instinctive courage. Charles's personal life reflected the same principles. Letters home reveal a man deeply connected to his family and community. In one letter to his mother, he wrote of his determination to make them proud, acknowledging the dual fight he carried against the enemy overseas and against prejudice at home. In another note, he promised a friend he would return safely, not out of fear, but out of responsibility. These were not empty words. They were the quiet backbone of a man whose courage was measured not by accolades, but by integrity. By the time Charles and the 99th Fighter Squadron were deployed to the Mediterranean, he had already earned a reputation among his peers. He was respected for his tactical brilliance, for his calm under fire, and for the way he inspired confidence in others. Younger pilots looked to him for guidance, while seasoned officers observed his performance with growing admiration. Yet even with this respect, the challenges were far from over. The Red Tails were entering skies dominated by experienced Luftwaffe pilots, and any misstep could be fatal. Charles' first missions were a test of both skill and nerve. He escorted bombers over Sicily, maneuvering through flak and enemy fighters with precision. Each sortie was a crucible, each maneuver a statement. They were not here to be spectators, they were here to fight and to win. His squadron watched him take lead in formation, guiding younger pilots through dangerous skies with a calm authority that belied his age. But beyond the tactics and maneuvers, there was a deeper motivation driving Charles. He understood that every success in the air was a victory on the ground, a statement to a country that still questioned his place. Each enemy plane shot down was more than a tactical gain. It was a blow against the systemic bias that sought to define his limits. He fought not only for the Allies, but for dignity, equality, and the recognition that courage knew no color. That morning, Charles's destiny arrived with the sound of marching boots and the roar of engines. The Mediterranean sun rose over the Sicilian airfield, casting long shadows across the tarmac. Pilots adjusted helmets, ran final checks, and exchanged determined glances. The air smelled of fuel and anticipation. Orders crackled through radios, calling them to their first major mission in hostile skies. For Charles, it was more than a fight against the enemy. It was a proving ground for every doubter, every critic, every person who had told him he didn't belong. And as he taxied his P-40 Warhawk toward the runway, the weight of history settled on his shoulders. The Red Tails were ready to write their legacy, one sortie at a time. Every dive, every maneuver, every shot fired would echo far beyond the clouds, into a world that had yet to recognize their valor. His orders came at dawn. The sun had barely risen over the Sicilian coastline on that fateful morning of July 2nd, 1943. When the Red Tails lined up along the tarmac, Engines roared, vibrating the earth beneath their feet. The scent of aviation fuel mingled with the salty Mediterranean breeze, sharp in the early heat. The 99th Fighter Squadron was ready, their mission clear: escort Allied bombers on a strategic strike against enemy positions. While facing the formidable Luftwaffe overhead, First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall gripped the controls of his P-40 Warhawk, eyes scanning the horizon. His squadron followed in tight formation, wings almost brushing, a delicate dance in the sky that demanded absolute trust. Every pilot knew that one mistake could mean death, yet each face carried a determined resolve. They were not just flying planes. They were carrying the hopes of a marginalized nation, the weight of proving themselves in a world that doubted their very competence. As the squadron climbed into the sky, Sicily stretched beneath them. Olive groves, rugged hills, and tiny villages caught in the shadow of war. The air was tense, alive with anticipation. Then, as they approached the designated bombing corridor, the unmistakable silhouettes of German fighters appeared on the horizon, Focke-Wulf 190s, sleek and deadly, slicing through the morning light. The Luftwaffe pilots had already heard whispers of these black American pilots, some mocking them in jest, some underestimating them entirely. They thought they were facing novices. The first engagement erupted suddenly. The German fighters dove from the sun, their guns blazing, tracer rounds cutting through the bright blue sky. Chaos exploded as P-40s spiraled, banked, and returned fire. The Red Tails' disciplined formation held, their training evident in each evasive maneuver and precision shot. Charles's heart raced, yet his hands remained steady on the controls. Every sense was heightened: the shriek of engines, the smell of gunpowder, the vibration of the airframe under fire, the fleeting glance of an enemy pilot's intent. In those moments, fear and exhilaration fused into focus. Charles identified his target, a Focke-Wulf attempting to break formation and attack a bomber below. With a deft pull of the stick and calculated burst from his .50 caliber guns, he struck. The enemy plane wobbled, smoke trailing, before spiraling down into the Sicilian countryside. Around him, other Red Tails executed the same precision strikes, each kill a testament to skill, courage, and unbreakable teamwork. The air erupted with a symphony of machine guns and roaring engines. One by one, German fighters fell, chased from the sky or driven into retreat. Yet the danger was far from over. Flak from below shredded the air, sending shrapnel buzzing past cockpits. Bombers veered, pilots shouted into radios, and the horizon was a chaotic blur of smoke, fire, and movement. But even amid the chaos, Charles never lost sight of his mission. He guided a younger pilot whose plane had been hit, signaling him into formation, offering silent reassurance through precise wing movements. It was a balance of aggression and care, of lethal skill and protective camaraderie. For Charles, every enemy plane destroyed was a victory, but every squadron member saved was equally vital. Hours passed like minutes, a blur of adrenaline, noise, and instinct. By the time the mission concluded, the Red Tails had successfully escorted the bombers and engaged the Luftwaffe with remarkable effectiveness. Their tally of victories that day would mark a turning point in perceptions. The pilots who were once mocked now became feared and respected adversaries. The airfield echoed with triumph and relief, though each pilot knew this was only the beginning of their proving ground. Yet, amidst the celebration, a quiet tension lingered. Intelligence reports hinted at a more dangerous mission looming, one that could push the squadron to the brink. The taste of success was sweet, but the war was far from over. For Charles, the weight of responsibility was heavier now, not just for the mission, but for the legacy he and his comrades were building, one dogfight at a time. And then, the skies opened with fire. The sky over Sicily was a maelstrom. Smoke trailed from burning enemy planes. Tracer rounds stitched fiery patterns through the bright morning air, and the constant roar of engines threatened to drown out thought itself. The Red Tails had already proven their skill, but now the Luftwaffe unleashed its deadliest wave yet. Twin squadrons of Focke-Wulf 190s dove from the clouds with lethal precision, targeting the bombers with merciless intent. First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall felt the familiar knot of fear and resolve tightening in his chest. This was more than a mission. This was a moment that would define him and his squadron forever. Every decision mattered. One wrong maneuver could mean the end, not just for him, but for the men relying on him to protect the bombers below. The first strike came with terrifying suddenness. A German fighter broke through the Red Tails formation, aiming directly for a B-17 below. Charles's eyes locked onto the plane, calculating distance, speed, and trajectory in fractions of a second. He dove without hesitation, weaving between enemy traces and flak bursts. His heart pounded, every muscle taut as he lined up his shot. A precise burst of gunfire tore through the Focke-Wulf's fuselage. Smoke curled from the engine, and the enemy pilot was forced to abandon the plane. Parachuting into the rugged hills far below, the squadron surged forward, a coordinated wave of speed, firepower, and sheer audacity. But the Luftwaffe was relentless. Another German fighter barrel-rolled toward Charles, its guns spitting fire that sliced the sky around him. He felt the sting of near misses. The P-40 shuddered under the impact of bullets grazing its wings, but he did not flinch. Every evasive maneuver was instinct, every return shot precise. Around him, the Red Tails fought with a fury born not just of training, but of necessity, the need to prove their worth in a world that had underestimated them. Then came the critical moment. Charles spotted a formation of 3 Focke-Wulfs attempting to encircle a vulnerable bomber. Time compressed. He realized that hesitation would be deadly. With a fierce roar, he dove between the enemy planes, splitting the formation. His guns found their targets. One plane spiraled down in flames, the second veered off in retreat, and the third tried desperately to regroup, only to meet another squadron member diving in support. The squadron's unity, forged in training and trust, had turned chaos into coordinated precision. In the midst of the battle, Charles's mind briefly flashed to home. The letters he had sent, the family who feared for him, the people who doubted him because of the color of his skin. All of it was here in every decision, every burst of gunfire, every evasive maneuver. The fight was no longer just about survival. It was about proving that skill, courage, and humanity knew no color. Minutes stretched like hours. The Red Tails pressed the attack, protecting the bombers at all costs. Enemy planes fell one by one, their pilots forced into retreat or surrender. Charles himself claimed his second confirmed kill, the fuselage of the Focke-Wulf smoking as it disappeared into the distance. Around him, the squadron worked like a living organism, instinctive and unyielding. They were not just pilots, they were symbols, rewriting perceptions with each successful maneuver. Yet, just as victory seemed within reach, disaster nearly struck. A stray burst of flak tore through the wing of Charles's Warhawk. Instruments shuddered, warning lights flashed, and the plane shuddered violently. Training took over. He stabilized the aircraft, maneuvered back into formation, and continued the fight, refusing to falter. Every second mattered. Hesitation could cost lives. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Luftwaffe began to withdraw. The skies cleared slowly, leaving behind smoke trails, debris, and the haunting silence that follows carnage. The Red Tails had achieved a remarkable victory, protecting every bomber, downing multiple enemy aircraft, and surviving an engagement that had tested the limits of courage and skill. Yet the moment was bittersweet. The adrenaline faded, replaced by exhaustion and a profound awareness of how close they had come to death. Charles sat in his cockpit, staring at the horizon, the enormity of what they had accomplished sinking in. Their fight was over for the day, but the war, and the battle for respect and recognition, was far from finished. When the dust settled, the silence was deafening. Hours after the skies cleared, the field at Castelvetrano was quiet, yet the echoes of battle lingered like a phantom. Smoke curled from the scattered wreckage of downed enemy planes, mingling with the scent of scorched earth and fuel. The red tails taxied their damaged P-40s back to base, the air thick with exhaustion, relief, and an unspoken pride. Charles B. Hall stepped out of his cockpit, legs trembling from adrenaline and tension. Around him, the squadron gathered, faces streaked with soot, sweat, and the weight of survival. They had faced a relentless enemy, and each of them had emerged alive, but not unscathed. The reality of war was never just in the victories. It was in the losses narrowly avoided, in the fragility of life suspended in the sky. Reports circulated quickly. Over 100 enemy aircraft had been downed during the day's engagements, a remarkable achievement for any unit. For the Tuskegee Airmen, it was historic. Each kill, each successful maneuver challenged the doubts cast upon them by those who had mocked, belittled, or outright denied their abilities. For too long, these pilots had carried the double burden of fighting the Axis powers and the prejudice of their own nation. Now their skill could no longer be ignored, yet recognition came slowly. Back at the command post, the official reports were precise, almost clinical, stripped of the heroism, fear, and courage that had marked the mission. The world outside the airfield would see the numbers, enemy planes destroyed, bombers protected, but few would understand the human story behind those figures. For Charles and his comrades, the victory was not merely in the tally of kills. It was in the affirmation of their very worth, in the knowledge that they had proven themselves in the most literal test of life and death. Letters were sent home, but they could never capture the full weight of the day. Charles wrote about the maneuvering, the speed, the sound of bullets slicing past, the smell of smoke, and the fleeting moments when he had stared death in the eye. Yet even his words could not convey the deeper truth, that courage in the sky was inseparable from the struggle for dignity on the ground. Each mission reaffirmed that they were not just pilots. They were pioneers, breaking barriers that had existed for generations. Among the squadron, camaraderie deepened. Shared danger forged bonds stronger than any outside recognition. They spoke little of the accolades or the statistics. Their conversations revolved around survival, strategy, and memories of the men and planes lost along the way. Even in victory, the shadow of mortality hung close, reminding them that every success was borrowed time, every maneuver a delicate balance between skill and fate. Historically, the impact of that day, and countless others like it, would ripple far beyond the airfields of Sicily. The Tuskegee Airmen's success became a tangible argument against segregation, a visible proof that African American pilots could excel in the most demanding conditions. Their courage inspired not only the military, but a generation of Americans who longed for equality, showing that heroism and competence were not defined by skin color. Yet the immediate aftermath was quieter, introspective. Charles stood at the edge of the airfield, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The adrenaline had ebbed, leaving only the echo of the fight and the weight of reflection. He thought of the men he had saved, of the planes he had defended, and of the enemy pilots who had become a mirror of their own mortality. Each death, each escape, each victory was a reminder that the sky held no bias, only skill, courage, and resolve. The war continued, but the Tuskegee Airmen had carved a mark that would not fade. Their actions that day, that week, and in the months ahead would challenge assumptions, rewrite history, and earn them a place in the annals of military excellence. Their courage in battle would become a beacon, not just of tactical success, but of social progress. But history would remember what came next. Decades later, the name Tuskegee Airmen still commands reverence. Their story, born in the smoke-filled skies over Sicily and the relentless dogfights across Europe, transcends mere military achievement. It is a testament to courage against both visible and invisible enemies, against bullets in the air and prejudice on the ground. Charles B. Hall and his fellow pilots had fought in a world where skill was questioned before it was witnessed, where bravery was measured not just by combat, but by the courage to exist in the face of systemic doubt. Their victories were more than tactical. They were symbolic. Every plane they protected, every bomber they escorted safely home, was a strike against the prejudice that sought to confine them to the margins. In the years that followed, the Tuskegee Airmen became more than soldiers. They became icons. Their success helped pave the way for the desegregation of the U.S. Armed Forces in 1948, when President Truman signed Executive Order 9981. But even beyond policy and legislation, their legacy resides in the imagination of a generation inspired by their daring and discipline. Young pilots of every race, students of history, and citizens fighting for equality could look to the skies and see proof that courage knows no color. Museums and memorials now honor them. Medals, plaques, and stories of valor recount their feats. Yet for the men themselves, recognition was never their primary mission. They fought because it was necessary, because the moment demanded it, and because they could not allow history to deny their existence or their competence. Their commitment to excellence, even when doubted, remains the enduring lesson. But the human story, the personal thread of sacrifice and brotherhood, is perhaps their truest legacy. Pilots like Charles carried letters from home, memories of family, and the weight of responsibility for their comrades. In every mission, the fear of death coexisted with an unspoken hope that the next sortie, the next battle, might bring them closer to proving their worth to the world and to themselves. The camaraderie forged in those tense skies became lifelong bonds, a reminder that heroism is often shared and that survival is a collective triumph. Their story also challenges us today. It reminds us that prejudice can be confronted, that excellence can break barriers, and that courage manifests not only in moments of dramatic action, but in the steady persistence of daily effort. It asks viewers to consider the invisible battles fought by those who dare to defy expectation, who challenge convention, and who refuse to accept limitation imposed by others. For Charles B. Hall, and for every Tuskegee Airman, the skies over Sicily were more than a battlefield, they were a proving ground. The lessons learned there echo across decades, that skill and valor cannot be confined by race, that courage is timeless, and that the fight for recognition and dignity is as important as the fight for victory itself. Because in every war, there are names that never fade. Names that remind us of resilience, of perseverance, and of the quiet, unyielding strength of those who refuse to be underestimated. The Tuskegee Airmen are such names. Their legacy soars, not only in the stories of history books, but in every heart that dares to defy doubt, every mind that strives for excellence, and every soul that refuses to let prejudice dictate its worth. When we look back at July 2nd, 1943, over Castelvetrono, we see more than a battle won. We see a generation of men who redefined bravery. They taught us that heroism is not granted. It is proven, and that the most enduring victories are those that shape society, challenge injustice, and inspire those who follow. The Red Tails did more than fight the Axis. They fought for history to remember them rightly, for courage to be recognized, and for the sky to belong to all who dared to rise. Their story continues, etched into time, a reminder that in every corner of history, extraordinary courage can break the chains of expectation, leaving a legacy that endures far beyond the battlefield.